Hi, welcome to another episode of Hot Takes. Now, we've talked before about how the SNP are going to lose seats at the Holyrood election, but are still expected to be the biggest party. And that's based on sort of current polling. But current polling doesn't take into consideration momentum. If one steps back a few months to the general election, one can see that in Scotland, Reform only managed about 7% of the vote. And to be fair, that's pretty good considering one, they weren't really trying, and two, they didn't field a candidate in every constituency. So to get 7% under those conditions, I think was, remarkably good. Let's face it. Probably better than they expected, if truth be known. Now, a lot of people in Scotland perhaps would have perceived Reform as being predominantly an English party, not one that would push much in Scotland. And so the fact they got 7%, would sort of, for some, raise an eyebrow. Now, of course, they did exceedingly well in England, of course, higher than expected. And going forward, this is going to continue. They've got this momentum now, and of course, with the council seat election coming up in May next year in England and Wales, that momentum will carry them onwards. They're expected to do exceedingly well, if truth be known. And then you have that momentum. And then the push into Scotland, where they are laying the groundwork now. They're building their local, regional area offices. They're getting the personnel in place. They're getting the candidates ready. And so coming off the back of the councils and going into the Holyrood election, they are going to represent a real challenge. And all those parties, all those legacy parties that previously dismissed Reform in Scotland as it's there. It might take out a few, but it isn't going to really irritate beyond irritate. Are all of a sudden starting to realise that Reform represent a real challenge, and for some, an existential challenge. I pointed out in an earlier video, I think it was yesterday, about how Reform could actually take out the Greens in total, which won't annoy anyone at all. Everyone will be pleased with that, except the Greens, of course. But hey, what the hell? But everyone else will be happy. So no Greens and have Reform in those seats instead. I think that's a win for everyone. However, if one takes a look at the momentum, we know, for example, that they're taking votes from the Tories because the Tories have stopped literally being Tories. They are now Blue Labour. They're taking votes from Labour because Labour have stopped being Labour and have become an insane socialist, Marxist mess of a party, hell-bent on destroying the country, notwithstanding Anna Sawal's Scottish Labour, slightly not that way. They are a traditional sort of socialist Labour, not a Marxist Labour. They haven't fallen down that rabbit hole yet. But even so, it's still embedded in people's minds about the madness of Labour. And so some people will just drop away from Scottish Labour and go to Reform. But the news is coming that possibly, and not many, I grant you, and I always said there wouldn't be any, but apparently there are some that are leaving the SNP and shifting over to Reform. To be fair, more are shifting over from SNP to Labour, but from SNP to Reform is also a thing. Who'd have thought that ever happened? And it's worrying, as I say, all these legacy parties to such an extent that if you take the sort of the growth curve of where we are, where we're expecting to be, where we're expecting to be in 2026, far from being like the third party as they would be today, they could be the second party. They could actually be bigger than Labour. And that, of course, will have Anna Sawal deeply worried. And it isn't beyond the imagination to think that the next government of Scotland could be Reform backed up by the Labour Party. And that seems odd if that's the case. We're through the looking glass, surely. But of course, this is what a function really of what's happening, because obviously the SNP themselves, which we haven't talked about yet, we've said about the Labour and the Tories failing, but the SNP themselves, they've always got this. They're a one-trick pony. All they've got is independence, and it's quite clear to everyone that independence is not going to happen. It just isn't. And so there's people within the SNP who know in their heart they're independents, they want independence, but they know they're not going to get it. At the moment, they've taken a look around Scotland saying, look, these people are going mental on this. They're not attending to the problems of Scotland. Let's give someone else a go, lend them the vote, come back later once the SNP has changed. Once you've got rid of the old guard and got new people in, because you can't keep a party run by dinosaurs. If you don't evolve, you go extinct. And that's exactly what is happening with the SNP. And that's exactly why Reform are making hay while the sun shines. They're going up and they're taking all these disillusioned SNP voters as well. And there's not many, or at least there's not many yet. But once they see good results in the English council elections, once they see a good standing in the Scottish Holyrood elections, I think at that point, the chances are that a lot more people from all the parties will start switching to Reform, knowing that in 2029, if it's not before, there's going to be a Reform government at Westminster. Especially if Elon puts his hands in his pockets and does as he's promised. More on that in a later video, because they're already looking now. Starmer's already looking now at changing the rules so that Elon Musk can't put money in. That's a sign of sheer panic, of course. There are ways and means around it, though. But it's just we live in a world of constant flux and change, which is good. You know, as I say, if you don't change, you go extinct. But for a party like the SNP to consider losing people to Reform, you know the SNP is in deep, deep trouble. Financially, we know, haven't got any backers, falling numbers. They can't afford really to fight elections. This other election in Glasgow, because of that woman not resigning, that's going to hurt them as well. They haven't got the money for that. It's just great, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. Till next time, stay safe, stay well. I'll speak to you later. Bye.